Welcome back. In this video, we are going to check out the permissions and we're going to add that to our application. So we need to have the location permissions in order to then, of course, get the location and then display the weather for that location. So here we had this toast, your location provider is already turned on. Instead of that, what I would like to do is I would like to check for permissions. I would like to get the find location and course location permissions. All right, and in order to do so, we are going to use Dexter once again. Okay, so let's just use the whole Dexter code, which we have done in the past. So I have used Dexter here with activity, and then you have to pass in the activity in which you want to ask for the permission. Then the different permissions that you need with permissions, and then you have the different permissions. So in my case, it's the manifest.permission access file location and access course location. And then with listener, so here we have multiple permission listeners and we have to implement those methods. So on permission checked and then on permission rationale should be shown. So those two as usual. So in on permission checked, what we will do is we will get the report, which is all permissions granted. So here, once we have all the permissions, that's where we want to request the location data. So we will need to add this function, which will then, of course, request the location data specifically. And then if any of the permissions is denied, so permanently denied, then for now, we're going to write a little toast, which is going to say, you have denied location permission. Please enable them as it is mandatory for the app to work. Okay, so this is just going to be the toast that we're going to display. And then in on permission rationale should be shown. That's where we are going to implement the functionality for show rationale dialog for permissions. So this is going to be another function that we need to create. And as you can see, we have this on same thread. So this whole thing, like this whole part up to here is actually writable in one line of code. So this could be one line of code. Basically, it's one connection. So we are asking for with permissions, then with the listener, which are those two listeners, then with on same thread, and then we check them. Okay, so this is generally the structure that we need to follow here, and that's what we do. Okay, and now of course we need to implement those methods, right? So we need to get the show rationale dialog for permissions, and what this will be is an alert dialog. So I'm just going to display an alert dialog with two buttons, so positive and negative button. So let's look at those. This is again nothing new. We have implemented this multiple times already. That's why I'm really just going over it. If you want to really dig deeper into that, you should check out the video earlier on in the course which goes over this feature. So when the rationale dialog for permissions should be shown, which means once the user has denied it and we don't have access and we really need to let the user know that we need it, then I want to display an alert dialog. So we use the builder in order to set a specific message, which is, it looks like you have turned off permissions required for this feature. It can be enabled under application settings. And then the positive button will be go to settings. And once the user clicks on them, we will try to start an intent, which will go to the application detail settings. And then we need to add the URI, which is the package name, which pretty much means that we want to open up the settings for our particular app. So that's why we need to add those two lines. Otherwise, we would just add the settings or open the settings. But here, we also add the URI, so the link to our application itself, so that it knows which settings should be opened. And that's why we need those two lines. And then we start that activity with the intent that we prepared. So we have the URI, we have the intent data. And if something goes wrong, we will just write it on the stack trace. And then we have the negative button, which will simply say cancel as a text, and the dialog will be dismissed. So here, by the way, we use double underscore because we don't use those parameters that are given to us. And here in set negative button, we use one of those two. So we use the dialog, but we don't use the second one. Okay, that's why we can just use underscore here. All right, now the next thing that we need to do is we need to get the location. And therefore, I'm going to create an object of fused location client. So private late init variable is going to be mFused location client. All right, so this is going to be the name of the variable, and it will be of type fused location provider client. This one will be required in order to get the location of the latitude and longitude, so to speak. So we want to get the latitude and longitude of the user in order to then use it for our API call so that we can get the weather for that location. Okay, so what we need to do, of course, is to initialize this variable because we said it will be a late init. So we need to late init it, which means we are going to initialize it in our onCreate method directly here. So let's say that our mFused location client will be location services dot get fused location provider client. All right, and here I'm going to pass in this, which is going to be this activity that we are in. All right, now at this point we can ask for the location of the user, and we've done that already before. And by the way, this is where we need to add to do, which we've just prepared. So let's do that real quick, by the way, before we ask for the location. So here, show rational dialog for permissions. That is what we need to display here. So on permission rational should be shown. We want to show our rational dialog. Okay. So that's why we prepared this method all together, right? And now we need to request the location data. All right, and what we will need is the request location data function, which we have prepared before already, or we have used before already. What that does is it requests the location, it sets the priority to be location request priority, high accuracy, and then we use our mFused location client, which is this late init variable, which we just prepared with location services get fused location provider client, and we then use that in order to request location updates. So here we need to pass in 3 variables. One of them is the location request, then a location callback, and then finally the looper. So we don't have the location callback yet, so that is something that we still need to prepare, and we have done that as well in the past. So let's just use the code that we have used before in order to get this mLocation callback, which is basically a new object of location callback that we're going to assign to this variable. Then we override the onLocation result. So that will be called as soon as we get the location. And you can see we get the last location of the user by using location result last location. And then we can get the latitude from it by using mLastLocation.latitude, because it is a location. And if we look at the location, it's a parsable which has the parameter latitude. So we can get the latitude, and we can also set it, as you can see here, but we can also get the longitude. Okay, and once we have those two, we will log them on the screen for now. All right. And at that point, of course, we have to request the location data on one point. Okay, and where would that be? Well, we still had a to-do here where we said, okay, once we have the multiple permission listener permissions, so once we have all the permissions that we need, we can request the location data. And that is in here. Okay, so at this point, we can test our application and see if this is going to work. And by the way, I added this add suppress lint, which will suppress the missing permission error, so to speak. So if you get rid of that, then it will complain because the mFused location client is not specifically requesting for permission. So usually you would have to surround that with a permission request. So surround this code. But the thing is, before we call this request location data is exactly where we ask for the permission check. So you could, of course, use all of that code and paste it just in here instead of creating a function for it. But if you will want to request a location data somewhere else, then it really makes sense to have this function here. But as I said, you need to have the permissions for this to work, otherwise this will create an error. Okay, now let's test this application. And there we are. So it requires us to allow the application. Let's deny for now. And then let's run this application again, because we are not requesting the location yet by doing anything specifically. You see we have no buttons or anything. It's just directly when we start the application, because this application is not going to have any buttons or anything. It will have an action button here at the top, which allows us to refresh the location, but generally the app should directly, when we open it up, display the weather. Okay, so here it looks like you have turned off permissions required for this feature. It can be enabled under application settings, and that is what we have prepared here in show rationale dialog for permissions. Because we have denied permissions, now this dialog, this alert dialog, pops up, and this is the alert dialog that we've prepared. So it says cancel, which is the set negative button, and it says go to settings, which is this positive button. So now we can go to the settings, and we can go to permissions, and we can allow this for this application. Okay, and now let's go back to the application. Let's run it again, because as I said, we don't have any other way of testing it. And you can see it doesn't require any permissions anymore, because it has the permissions that it needs. Okay, at this point we can start using our API, and we're going to use retrofit in order to establish a connection to the internet and download the file. All right, so let's do that in the next video. See you there.